the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this is I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Welcome to the Michelle Tafoya podcast.
Well, that is the clip you're going to see a lot of. It's a big highlight from last night's debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. And it was a moment where the moderators it was one of their highlights, where they pushed him on a mistruth, a lie that he has told about being in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre. He wasn't. The amazing thing is this has only been fact-checked recently, but it came up at the debate. He should have known it was coming, and his answer was ridiculous. We're going to get into the debate. We're going to give you the highlights from our vantage point of what we saw last night. And then Aaron Brownback wrote a book called Stolen Valor, and it's about Tim Walz and how he has lied about his military record and all the other things that he did while governor of Minnesota that make him sketchy, to say the least. And then Captain Tom Burbidge is part of a group of graduates from the Naval Academy who are truly concerned about the state of our readiness, the state of America, the state of the protection of the Constitution in America. And he will talk to us about a book of essays that they have put together, which I can't recommend highly enough. We'll get into that with Tom Burbidge. All of that coming up next. All right, let's start with the debate last night. Tim Walz, J.D. Vance. Our friend Jim Garrity wrote for the National Review about this, and one of my favorite lines that he said was that the gist of it was that Tim Walz really knows what time it is today. He can really see the watch clearly, the clock on the wall clearly, because J.D. Vance cleaned his clock. That was the gist of what he said, and I agree. Now, other networks, MSNBC, believe that Tim Walz won the debate. I don't know how they can say that. But I've picked out a few moments for you. If you didn't get to hear it, let's give you some highlights, okay? And we'll start with J.D. Vance, because one of the things that the moderators, who were kind of annoying, did was they turned the hurricane story into a climate change focus, but he was ready. So instead of talking about how to handle the horrific results in North Carolina and other places and what's being done for those people, they turned this into climate change. Should have predicted that. But here's how J.D. Vance handled that. Take a listen.
What have Kamala Harris's policies actually led to? More energy production in China, more manufacturing overseas, more doing business in some of the dirtiest parts of the entire world. And when I say that, I mean the amount of carbon emissions they're doing per unit of economic output. So if we actually care about getting cleaner air and cleaner water, the best thing to do is to double down and invest in American workers and the American people. And unfortunately, Kamala Harris has done exactly the opposite.
So what he was getting at there was, here in America, we produce energy in a very clean fashion, much cleaner than places like Venezuela or Russia. And so why are we offshoring so much? I mean, China won't abide by any of the climate change, quote unquote, rules. Neither will India. But we get so much of our manufacturing done there. Why not bring it home if we really want to make the earth cleaner? We want cleaner air and cleaner water. So a point to J.D. Vance on that. I thought he pivoted brilliantly from, her accusing them of calling climate change a hoax to, here's what you really do if you want to fix climate change. The next one is J.D. Vance on deportations, because, of course, the moderators made it sound like this was going to be this horrific, military coming out, rounding up people, putting them in places and sending them out. So, again, I thought J.D. Vance was masterful on this. And look, I really had my eyes wide open on both of these candidates, but I thought J.D. Vance batted 1,000 in this debate. So here's what he said about the deportations.
So we've got 20, 25 million illegal aliens who are here in the country. What do we do with them? I think the first thing that we do is we start with the criminal migrants. About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks. And then I think you make it harder for illegal aliens to undercut the wages of American workers. A lot of people will go home if they can't work for less than minimum wage in our own country. And by the way, that'll be really good for our workers who just want to earn a fair wage for doing a good day's work.
Well done. I mean, start with the criminals, right? Anytime that Tim Walz mentioned someone who was somehow a victim of anti-abortion laws or pro-life laws, I wish that J.D. Vance had come back with Laken Riley or, the names, Jocelyn Nungari, the names of young women who will never get the chance to have their quote unquote reproductive freedom because of immigration, illegal immigration and migrant violence. Okay. Tim Walz he tried to twist the immigration debate into something about opioid deaths. And let's just listen to Tim Walz for a moment on his take on immigration, deportation, fentanyl, etc.
And the good news on this is the last 12 months saw the largest decrease in opioid deaths in our nation's history. 30% decrease in Ohio, but there's still more work to do. But let's go back to this on immigration. Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of the largest state and a border state in California. She's the only person in this race who prosecuted transnational gangs for human trafficking and drug interventions.
They love that term, transnational gangs. They love it. They love to use it. And that she was the DA in California and prosecuted transnational gangs. It's such a cool term, right? Transnational gangs. But what he said first, we've seen the largest decrease in fentanyl overdoses in history. Anyone saw what I saw there? Anyone see what I saw? That's because we've had the largest increases of overdose deaths in American history. When the deaths are way up here, yeah, you're going to have a significant decrease. It's the same thing they do with employment and COVID. That Donald Trump oversaw the largest unemployment, the drop in employment in history. Yeah, because they closed all the businesses. They kept us all home. And to suggest that Joe Biden reinvented all these new jobs, they were bounce back jobs. We reopened. That's not creating jobs. How to lie with statistics. All right, moving on. Vance, this is an example of the moderators who said that they weren't going to fact check. They were going to stay out of it, right? But they did. They did fact check. And then when J.D. Vance tried to call them out on it, they shut down the mics. Let's just play you this portion of the debate.
Margaret, the rules were that you guys weren't going to fact check. And since you're fact checking me, I think it's important to say what's actually going on. So there's an application called the CBP One app where you can go on as an illegal migrant, apply for asylum or apply for parole, and be granted legal status at the wave of a Kamala Harris open border wand. That is not a person coming in, applying for a green card and waiting for 10 years. That is the facilitation of illegal immigration, Margaret, by our own leadership.
Thank you, Senator, for describing the legal process. We have so much to get to, Senator.
Those laws have been on the books since 1990.
Thank you, gentlemen.
The CBP One app has not been on the books since 1990. It's something that Kamala Harris created, Margaret.
Gentlemen, the audience can't hear you because your mics are cut. We have so much we want to get to. Thank you for explaining the legal process. Nora?
Thank you for explaining the legal process. We have so much we want to get to. All right. That was... I don't know how y'all saw that or how y'all heard that, but if Vance was right, if you're going to fact check me, let me fact check right back. And he's right. That app has not been on the book since 1990. And the flights, the parole flights, they are being completely taken advantage of and the rules bent for those. All right. Here, let's go to J.D. Vance again on the economy. And he did a good job of saying to Tim Walz, man, you have a tough job. you got to play whack-a-mole. You've got all these things that Kamala says she was going to do, and she's been changing and flip-flopping her stances. This is tough for you, Tim, and I get it. But here's what he further said on Kamala Harris's economy.
Well, first of all, you're going to hear a lot from Tim Walz this evening, and you just heard it in the answer, a lot of what Kamala Harris proposes to do. And some of it, I'll be honest with you, it even sounds pretty good. Here's what you won't hear, is that Kamala Harris has already done it. Because she's been the vice president for 3.5 years. She had the opportunity to enact all of these great policies. And what she's actually done instead is drive the cost of food higher by 25%, drive the cost of housing higher by about 60%. Open the American southern border and make middle-class life unaffordable for a large number of Americans. If Kamala Harris has such great plans for how to address middle-class problems, then she ought to do them now. Not when asking for a promotion, but in the job the American people gave her 3.5 years ago. And the fact that she isn't tells you a lot about how much you can trust her actual plans.
Again, point to J.D. Vance there, because he had the details, he had the numbers, and he had the argument that said that Kamala Harris has been in office for 3.5 years. And suddenly she wants to change everything? Now she's going to fix everything? She's still in office. She could do a couple of these things now, but she isn't. All right. We've got to get to Tim Walz had to have known the question was coming on his claim that he was in Hong Kong. First, he said he was in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre. Then he's changed it to Hong Kong. And then it turns out that he gets fact-checked in the last week or so here, just in the last week or so, because, see, the Minnesota press doesn't fact-check him on anything. The Minnesota press is the wind at his back. So it took until now for this to be fact-checked. And what was discovered was, at the time of the Tiananmen Square massacre, you know where Tim Walz was? He was in Nebraska. He got pushed on this. The first part of his answer is so long and so meandering that we didn't feel like we could play it for you. But basically, he said, I grew up where I could ride my bikes until the lights went out, and I'm proud of my service. It was strange. It was incoherent. It was rambling. He had to know this question was coming. And lo and behold, in their one shining moment, the moderators pushed back on him. Here's how it went.
Governor, just to follow up on that, the question was, can you explain the discrepancy?
All I said on this was I got there that summer and misspoke on this. So I will just, that's what I've said. So I was in Hong Kong and China during the democracy protests went in. And from that, I learned a lot of what needed to be in governance.
Wow. So you went to communist China to learn about governance. But it was awkward. He was nervous, and no one came to his rescue, which I think he probably, when he paused there, was expecting someone to come to his rescue. But they didn't. And this is not the first time that Tim Walz has lied. He lied about his military rank. He has lied and lied and lied. I just find him to be the most disingenuous, inauthentic person. I don't know how anyone could feel comfortable with him being a heartbeat away. Finally, they each got a closing argument. I'll just play you Tim Walz because just as he did in that last answer, this is a teacher, ladies and gentlemen, a former teacher. And his grammar is poor, to say the least. And if you say that makes him folksy, okay, fine. I think it's disingenuous, but here's what he said about fear in his closing comments.
We don't need to be afraid. Franklin Roosevelt was right. All we have to fear is fear itself. Kamala Harris is bringing us a new way forward. She's bringing us a politics of joy. She's bringing real solutions for the middle class, and she's centering you at the heart of that.
Okay. Alls we have to fear? I'm sorry. It just sounds so clumsy and so disrespectful. And then he goes on to this politics of joy and putting you at the center. Do you really think that every American, not to mention every non-citizen living in this country right now, can be at the center? That government can take care of everyone and put everyone at the center? You know what puts everyone at the center? The Constitution. of the people, by the people, for the people. That's what puts you at the center. You're in charge of electing people. They work for you. So when they promise to put you at the center, they should promise that they are working for you in the sense that you tell them what to do. They don't get to decide about your gas stoves and your electric vehicles and all of that. You decide. But Kamala Harris and Tim Walz have made it perfectly clear. They have a problem with free speech. They have a problem with gas stoves. And it's been interesting watching the good folks in North Carolina who are without electricity saying, thank God I had a gas stove. Thank God I had gas in my car, which they're running low on, but that's a whole nother story. All we have to fear is fear itself. Guys, I've been screaming this from the mountaintops. I live in Minnesota. I've lived here for 30 years. I've seen a number of governors, Jesse the Body Ventura included. And this guy makes Jesse look like a diplomat. He's a scary leftist. And if you couldn't see that last night, and if you're just going to buy into Joe Scarborough and everyone at MSNBC saying he'd be a good neighbor, that's if you like socialism. All right. Coming up, we're going to talk to an author of a book about Tim Walz and his stolen valor, give you a little bit more insight into that. That's coming up next. I have a lot of trouble sleeping. I got to admit, world events, the state of politics, it has me not sleeping well. And it's a huge problem for a lot of people. And also my shoulder surgery lately is making it hard to sleep. But let me tell you what I found that helps me sleep better. And I'm certain it can help you. It's not a drug. It's not a prescription. It is a cream that I put on at bedtime. It's simple. Now, I was a skeptic, but I tried it once and it really worked. I slept great. The company is Sleep Cream, and they use an all-natural CBD combined with the finest essential oils. Some of their scents, the lavender is really good. So what I do is I put it on my forearms, the inside of my forearms, maybe on the bottoms of my feet. And within minutes, I feel chill. I'm relaxed. And my body is allowed to do what it's supposed to do, which is sleep. You can find them at sleepcream.com. Just try Sleep Cream for a couple nights. See if it works for you the way it does for me. And if you don't experience better sleep, Sleep Cream will refund your purchase guaranteed. You don't have to return anything. So go to sleepcream.com, CREME.com. Sleep Cream, CREME. That's the way they spell cream here.com. And for the next few weeks, use this code GAMEDAY, all one word, at checkout to save $20 off your first order. That's Game Day at checkout, all one word, $20 savings. You ready for your best sleep ever? Sleep Cream, CREME.com. Erin Brownback, it's great to have you. You're an author. You're a messaging specialist. You wear a lot of hats, and they're all really interesting. But this book is very timely that you've just put out called Stolen Valor. And it's the military fraud and government failures of Tim Walz. And we just went through during this podcast and talked about his debate performance last night. The military stuff didn't come up. It seems that maybe these moderators had enough of that topic. Why is it so important?
You know, Michelle, thank you for having me on your show. And I'll say this to the American people who really care about our veterans and the honoring our veterans. What Tim Walz has done with his military career is he's lied about it to make himself look better. You can see sort of his carefully crafted messaging around a lot of areas of his career. But in the military career, there are three particular lies that he has told and promoted and allowed other people to promote. So first is he left his men when they were about to be deployed to war in Iraq. He knew all evidence, as you'll see in the book, all evidence demonstrates that he knew they were about to be deployed and he quit. He quit early. And that's key because when he quit early, he ended up not finishing what he needed to finish to become a command sergeant major. So the second thing that he has done since he has left the military is he's lied about his rank. He has called himself a retired command sergeant major when actually he was demoted. That rank was stripped from him because he did not fulfill his commitment. And that, Michelle, is an actual act of stolen valor, which has both fines and potential imprisonment consequences to it if somebody is prosecuted for that. And then the third thing that he's done in the military area is he has created this battle-hardened veteran persona and talks about himself having been in combat and carried weapons of war, when the truth is the closest that he ever got was being deployed to a beautiful location in Italy where he saw no combat and no war. And so he has diminished our veterans who have served on our behalf, who have laid their lives down, who have put their lives in jeopardy, whose families have lost them. He has diminished the honor of them by claiming that honor for himself and allowing others to perpetuate that claim.
Well, you've put those three nuggets into very clear language that we can all appreciate and understand, and that should not be forgotten. And we see this tendency, I don't know if tendency is even a strong enough word, we see this willingness to lie about his experiences. He calls himself a football coach. He was an assistant coach. A lot of people will say that's no big deal. I don't know. I covered a lot of football in my day, and you can't just claim that you took a team to a state championship when you weren't the head coach.
Well,
so
Michelle, honestly, he was the head coach of a football team. I believe, if I remember correctly, it was a junior high team that he then got a DUI for driving drunk and way over the speed limit and was kicked off of that team.
And then blamed the DUI on some sort of hearing
loss
issue.
from his time in the military and all of those mass, weapons that he was shooting. But then went on to be an unpaid assistant coach.
Right.
And that's what he is saying. He led that team to a championship as an unpaid assistant coach.
Yeah, that's not leading the team to a championship. I'm glad he was part of it, whatever. And just like, you can't diminish all of his service, but you certainly can point out how he padded his resume and how he said things happened that didn't happen. Let's go to the China thing. This from the debate last night, we detailed this, and it was, to me, the only bright spot for the moderators, that they pushed him on this issue.
Yes.
He had to know the question was coming, Aaron. He had to know the question was coming. And he meandered all over the place about, I came from a middle-class place where you could ride your bike until the street lights went out. And I was proud of that service. And then I served, and I'm passionate about teaching. And I was a really good teacher, and people who know me know me. And then he went into, I'm a knucklehead, and sometimes I talk too much. It was his worst moment of the night. But again, it points out he originally claimed he was, first he said he was in China during the Tiananmen Square massacre. Then he said he was in Hong Kong. Now we know he was in Nebraska. What does this tell you?
Yeah, Michelle. Well, first of all, I just want to say J.D. Vance did such a wonderful job of presenting himself as a statesman in that
I would
debate.
agree.
And comparatively, Tim Walz presented himself as sort of a good old boy, knucklehead, Minnesota farmer. And he used a lot of language like, well, and like I say, and things.
All's I'm saying.
All's I'm saying. But the truth is he wasn't in China when he said he was. And he said, I get caught up in the rhetoric. That was that's what his description, I get caught up in the rhetoric. And honestly, what that's a cover for, what that's a good, comfortable cover for is I lie. When he ran for governor the second time, Tim Walz lies was the big mantra of those who opposed him because it was so common. So here you'll see, even in our book, it's all over the place that he said that he was in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square massacre. And there seems to be something in his heart that connects him deeply to China. And there's more than just something. There's many pieces and much evidence. But even to just say he was there and then to go there to Tiananmen Square on his honeymoon, to get married on the date of the massacre so that he would always
Because it
remember
was a memorable
his
day.
wedding
Yeah.
day, to take 60 students with him on his honeymoon to Tiananmen Square. He's just deeply attached and rooted to China.
Well, we got to get to that because there was one point in his discussion about China and how he took all these trips there that he learned about governance from from a communist party. But he also said, and I want to get into this with you because you have a really fascinating take on this. He said, I wish Donald Trump would take a trip because then he'd know that you can't praise Xi Jinping on the COVID response and you can't get in a trade war with Xi Jinping that you can't win. So he kind of put a little bit of shade on Xi Jinping, and you say there's a reason for that.
Absolutely.
Go ahead and explain.
Absolutely. So if you study Walls and if you read the book Stolen Valor, you'll see his great admiration for China, that he learns much about his governance from China, which is absolutely true. The Chinese Communist Party, they make a point of grooming foreign military officials to bring them to their side and help them to spread Marxist ideals to the world. And through Tim Walz's 30 trips to China, from the time that he was a young military official, you can see that that's been happening. And yet, there are these atrocities. And so how does he talk about those? Well, there's a term in China called big help with a little bad mouth. And you'll see that's one of the chapters of the book in Stolen Valor. And what that means is we don't mind if you say a little bit of bad about us, as long as when the rubber meets the road, you are giving us big help. And that is what Walls has done for China consistently. You can see that in all sorts of areas. You can see it in the fact that a human rights group from Spain did research on where there are Chinese police stations around the world. And one of them is in Minnesota. And Walls has done nothing to stop that Chinese police station from harassing citizens and from abducting them. So he's been so negative about the police force of Minneapolis. I mean, look what he did to decimate that group of men and women. And yet he does nothing to stop China from having this police station that's harassing and abducting people in his own state. It's just consistent. He has helped them on the business front time after time. He has helped to spread their ideas. And so if occasionally he throws out a statement that says, oh, well, they're not doing it right, they don't seem to mind that. He actually went and met with them, with their leaders, and he said to them something about their human rights. And then he said, but don't look at America because we don't do it right either.
Yeah. It's just, it's sickening. There's so much. He also lied about the abortion law last night, and I posted an article that substantiates what J.D. Vance said, that if a botched abortion results in a live birth, the doctors no longer have to preserve that life. They just have to kind of attend to it. And he lied about that, Tim Walz. He said, that's not what the bill says. Yes, it is.
Yes.
He took language out of the bill. He took this protection language out of the bill so that babies could just be left. And we know that it's happened multiple times here in Minnesota. So before I let you go, last thing. What I hear you saying is that Tim Walz is a Marxist.
Yes, that is what I'm saying. Walz was indoctrinated by the Chinese Communist Party, and Marxism is the expression of communism. It is the theory of communism, and you can see that has been his goal in his policies. So he has promoted the sexualization of children because the breakdown of the family and sexual norms is a key part of advancing Marxism. He has promoted abortion, both for that reason and because it keeps women in the workforce. It helps the state to sort of regulate population and workers. Then if you look at his COVID regulations, you can see plays right out of the playbook of Marxism and communism. You can see how he had snitch lines for people to report on their neighbors. And there was so much control and lockdown. But in the middle of that, the George Floyd race riots came to the surface. And this is key because in America, it is very difficult to promote Marxism. It's hard to get Marxism to have a hold when you have a very large middle class and an upwardly mobile population, because Marxism is about a clash between the upper class and the lower class. So what they've done, Marxists in America have done, is they've overlaid critical race theory on Marxism. And that's what you see in the George Floyd race riots. You see how they've worked to make racial classes who are at odds with each other. And Walls worked to get to foment resentment and rebellion from this suppressed racial class. And he did everything he could to make that uprising overturn the police and oppose anything that would help to keep more of a stability in our society, because Marxism requires that tumult to overturn the ruling class. And that's what Walls is looking for because of his connections to China and his indoctrination in Marxism.
I hope there's more digging into this, but certainly people should get the book Stolen Valor, The Military Fraud and Government Failures of Tim Walls. Erin, thank you so much for joining us. I hope people will go get the book.
Thanks, Michelle.
Are you feeling overwhelmed by the increasing cost of health insurance? Have you had enough of not having control over your healthcare dollars? Introducing ShareRight, healthcare done the right way. Now, at ShareRight, you're not just a number. You're part of a caring community. And forget about paying excessive premiums. Get this, with ShareRight, you stand to save 30 to 50% compared to regular health insurance. Think about what you could do with all of those savings. But it's more than just savings. ShareRight ensures that you have access to the care you deserve precisely when you need it, from routine checkups to unexpected emergencies. With ShareRight, your healthcare is their top priority. So empower yourself today by taking control of your healthcare costs. Visit shareright.org/Tafoya, Tafoya. It's there on your screen to learn more and see how much you can save. Visit shareright.org/Tafoya, SHARERIGHT.org/Tafoya. That's shareright.org/Tafoya for healthcare done the right way. Up next, Captain Tom Burbidge, part of the Calvert Task Group. He'll explain what that is. Don't give up the ship. Woke politics are endangering our military and our nation. He is up next. Captain Burbidge, it's so great to meet you. You gave me permission to call you Tom, so I will call you Tom for the rest of this interview. I've been so enjoying this book, Don't Give Up the Ship. Woke politics are endangering our military and our nation. And you say, it's interesting. It's written by the Calvert Task Group. Why don't you, in a nutshell, explain to people what the Calvert Task Group is?
Well, it's an interesting name. There's a bunch of us that were enjoying our retirement years, playing golf, kind of a social group. And we couldn't remember each other's emails, so we made a block email called the Calvert Group. Strictly social, nothing to do with the book at that point in time. Named after the superintendent at the Naval Academy when we were there. Some of the fellows in the book actually served with Admiral Calvert. Famous Navy leader, was a submariner, surfaced the Nautilus at the North Pole, quite a career. When we decided to come off the couch and be a little more vocal, we contacted his family and got permission to keep using the name. And we added the word task because it sounds more Navy. It has nothing to do with any kind of official operation or anything. So the Calvert Task Group is that group of people. It's grown from about 8 or 9 of us that got together a couple times a year to a little over 400 now.
Wow.
Just people that read the book or read the essays and decide this is something they would like to know more about.
You said we decided to get up off the couch. You were originally a social group of golfers. What made you want to get up off the couch?
Well, we come from a generation of forefathers that fought and in many cases died, shed blood for the country to preserve the freedoms and the patriotism that we all enjoy today. We didn't feel we were leaving that same legacy when we saw what was going on around us, and we decided to get more involved. It really started with an incident at the Naval Academy in about 2019, 2020. And if you remember that period of time, there was some lawlessness going on. There was the riots that were going on in various cities. There was an anti-police movement. This particular midshipman, both of his parents were police. And he got himself into some trouble for some things he said, which in my mind were not near important enough to be thrown out of the Naval Academy, but he was on the verge of that happening. So we sort of got involved. It turns out to be a great young man. He's number one in his class in Pensacola. Super guy. So we're glad we did that. But as we did that, we started peeling the onion back. We started seeing some other things that were very concerning to us. You know, there was almost like a sudden precipitous national decline in some of the things that are important to us, whether it's family, with parental rights, or whether it's the military, or whether it's defense. And it turns out it wasn't a sudden decline at all. It wasn't an overnight success. It had been in work for quite some time, going back to almost 2011, 12, 13 years ago, and it had taken root. And I think it got accelerated by COVID. It got accelerated by opening the border. There's lots of things that have sort of exacerbated that whole set of issues. So we have a bunch of closet writers, and we were writing articles and getting them published every now and then. But as everyone knows, a published word, a single article has a shelf life of 48, 96 hours.
Yeah.
And we thought, well, maybe they're good enough to put them in a book, because the book would then get broader distribution. It would open up the chance to talk to people like you that would be interested, sort of using the book as a leverage to get into the podcast genre, which opens up exposure to what we're trying to focus attention on to a much larger group.
And so, again, it's in the title of the book, Woke Politics Are Endangering Our Military and Our Nation. I'm assuming that that's what you saw. And you're right, this didn't happen overnight. Things happen slowly and then all at once. There's been a tipping point of some kind that I see endangering our military as well. Your biggest concerns, obviously you're from the Naval Academy, so I'm assuming that your focus has been on the Navy and the Naval Academy. You said some things took root back around 2011. What specifically did you see?
We saw a policy implementation starting back in those days, which established offices of diversity, equity, inclusion in all the government institutions, including the military. And it sort of grew into a national industry almost.
Yeah.
Today, that industry is about $15 billion. So it's heavily financially incentivized at this point. And it's very difficult to change course when you get that much of a movement that started. I think it started as a fringe element. What most concerned us was everybody in the military and the government takes an oath to the Constitution. And what we felt was that the constitutional pillars were being eroded in this environment that we're in today. Does that oath really mean anything? It does to some, it doesn't to others. How do we get focused back on the fact that we're not a pure democracy, we're a constitutional republic, and we owe our oath to that constitutional republic?
It alarms a lot of people these days. We're seeing people say the Constitution is obsolete. It should just be burned up. We should start over. We should rip it up. And in fact, it's one of the greatest documents ever written. And I don't know what people are seeing in it that makes them think that it can't last the test of time. When you hear that kind of talk, what goes through your mind?
I think the American spirit has had a way of rallying in the past, and we're hopeful that it can rally one more time and pull this pendulum back towards where it comes off the fringe, back towards more in the center where the country ought to be. Fundamental to a constitution, our constitution, is the three equal branches of government, and there are guardrails around that, and they're fuzzy right now. It's why one branch of government can challenge another branch of government, which is not part of our constitutional, bylaws, is almost beyond me. And it's happening every day. You see challenges on the Supreme Court. You see executive orders that aren't voted on by anybody. Lots of things that are happening that are sort of skirting the edges of what are the fundamentals of the constitutional republic that we live in.
And we talked about this on my podcast about a week ago, the fact that the administrative state is doing a lot of the legislating, not the people in the legislature. I love what you wrote, one of these essays called The Oath. And you just referenced this, taking the oath to the Constitution. You say the great American experiment to implement a constitutional republic is not necessarily subject to the same failure criteria. That may be our fundamental issue today. Is our constitutional republic strong enough to resist the suicidal tendencies of other democracies? Those same tendencies are clearly hard at work within our current administration. I've heard another one of my favorite people, Gad Saad, who is a Canadian, talk about suicidal empathy, for example, that we're so empathetic to others that we're going to kill our own culture. When you talk about the suicidal tendencies of other democracies, what do you mean?
They're not beholden to a set of principles. Their democratic, pure democracy rule is the democratic rule is open to a vote. The vote is sometimes free and fair, sometimes not. It tends to become autocratic. It comes to be very long terms, as opposed to our form of government, which tends to be by the people, not by the government. And it's that merge there, that fine line that divides those two, in my mind, that takes you over the edge. And once the government is completely in charge and able to impart things like censorship and law, well, they call it lawfare now, but misuse of the Department of Justice and things like that. Once they're able to do that, they've crossed over the line. They're not responding to the guardrails that were set in place, around the constitutional republic, which is our form of government. There are other forms of government. I think ours has been the most successful so far, and America has been kind of the shining light on the hill, but it's under threat. Another thing that I think is really important to mention is that it's a bit of a Rubik's Cube. There's lots of colors on the cube. There's lots of ways you can turn it. But when you look at the real issues on the military, it's the ability to recruit, retain, and maintain readiness and lethality in defense of our country. All of those are under threat right now. And you have to ask yourself why. And it gets down to I think the K through 12 system and the ideological changes that are occurring in our society. The threat against parental rights and children below the age of 18 that can make decisions without their parents being involved. All those kind of things are shaping a path to a different world than the one we live in right now. And my belief is that the sleeping stakeholders for the country that we live in need to wake up.
Couldn't agree more. You went on to say the purity of our election processes has been compromised. And people after the 2020 election said that was the freest and safest election of all time. They said that like the next day, which I'm not even sure how you could know that the next day. I guess I'll finish with this. There are a lot of problems, and you've just named, you and I have just begun to scratch the surface. We could go for hours on this. What gives you hope today?
Well, I think there is a large group of America out there that is relatively silent. I think the fringe element, no longer fringe, but the dominant conversation that we're seeing is a very vocal group of folks that are not being challenged in many ways. If you look at the diversity, equity, inclusion movement that sort of underpins all this, you have a phenomenal reputation in the sports world. What if that applied to the sports world? In the sports world, that is a matter of winning and losing a game, right? So the risk is you might lose a basketball game, you might lose a football game if you gave everybody an equal outcome. The military, the risk is life and death.
Yeah.
So why isn't that an important issue to bring into the military debate that's going on right now? We pose questions like that and try to get people thinking, try to increase awareness of the fact that we're on a very narrow path right now that could cross that line we were talking about.
We don't want to see that happen. This book, I recommend it. Don't Give Up the Ship, which is one of those Navy sayings, right? Woke politics are endangering our military and our nation, by the Calvert Task Group. You can go on. Where can people find this most easily?
It's easiest on Amazon.
Okay.
And again, Amazon is not an author-friendly place necessarily for those of us that have done books in the past, but it is a distribution center that allows people to get to the book. There are other ways, but that's the easiest way.
Okay.
We have a website,
yeah.
Michelle, and I know you're going to mention that, but that's another way you can access the book through the website.
And we are showing people the website address, but for people who are just listening today, give us the address.
It's Calvert Task Group, all one word, .org.
Calvert, CALVERT, taskgroup.org, all one term. I recommend this so highly. And the beautiful thing about this book is you can flip through, and these are essays. You can read each of them in 60 to 90 seconds and be so enriched by that 60 to 90 seconds of some just wonderful leaders of America. I thank you so much, Tom. It's been wonderful to meet you, and I hope we can have you back.
Well, you too, and I appreciate you having us on. It's great to get a chance to talk about this.
I couldn't agree more. I recommend this book highly. Don't Give Up the Ship, calverttaskgroup.org. You can find it on Amazon. There it is. It's again, great reading, in little bits at a time, wonderfully referenced. He is a captain, a patriot, and now an author as well, of many times over. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's great being here.
You know, a lot of people are saying that last night's vice presidential debate won't move the needle. I hope that it does. I saw on X a lot of people saying, wow, I didn't think I was going to like J.D. Vance, but I do. Or, wow, I don't agree with everything J.D. Vance says, but I like this guy. He came across as very likable, very statesmanlike, very calm, cool, and collected. And I can recall when John McCain picked Sarah Palin as his running mate, I think it did do damage to his campaign, and people were afraid of her being one heartbeat away. Think about Tim Walz being one heartbeat away, a guy with real ties to China, a guy who can't find the truth to save his life, and a guy who really single-handedly has ruined the state of Minnesota. As a Minnesotan, I want to urge you to think about that before you vote. And be brave, do good, make sure you vote. No matter how you're going to vote, do it. It matters. Have some courage today. Do something, do a little bit of good, and we'll see you next time.